Okay, so I've moved now and I'm sort of settled into the new place. I have a couple ideas for a few series in the new house, maybe doing a build or two, and you can probably hear that my mic doesn't sound that great right now. I don't have everything else set up like I need to produce normal reviews yet, but fortunately I've already recorded footage for a few reviews before I moved, so I've got a few weeks of content ready to edit while I get my office set up. I'm sorry I couldn't finish my Far Cry 5 videos before I moved. Hopefully some of you are still interested in seeing the Potato Masher square up with the PS4, especially because the Masher loses. Okay, so it's not quite that cut and dry. The Masher and PS4 trade back and forth on resolution, frame rate, and visual quality, but for the average player using PS4-like settings, I think the Masher is a slightly worse experience. Running at 1080p in this mix of settings I'm calling medium, the Masher is largely similar to the PS4. Textures, sharpness, light rays, anti-aliasing, all are fairly similar. Any differences vary scene to scene, with neither platform having a strong advantage. However, the PS4 does appear to be using one setting higher when it comes to shadows. And in a scene like this one, the difference is very noticeable. Grass and ground decorations seem more planted on the PS4, and there's more accurate global illumination setting the scene. Sure, I could drop a few settings on the Masher to increase the shadows to match, but then it would just look worse in some other areas, so I chose shadows. It's one of those things where if you didn't see the two platforms side by side, you'd probably be perfectly happy with either, but once you see it, the PS4's shadows do give it an edge that's hard to ignore. Reflections do appear to be a bit better on the Masher than the PS4, but that's a smaller difference in the shadows. Both platforms hold at 30 FPS decently well, but I saw what looked to be a few drops on the PS4, and the Masher does drop a few frames during the opening raid on the compound. That's the most consistently demanding area of the game that I've found so far, but it's possible that the Masher would drop in a few other situations too. Regardless, in normal gameplay both platforms seem to run the game fine. Fine that is, if you're okay with 30 FPS. I generally don't mind 30 FPS depending on the game, even though I of course prefer 60, all else being equal. An exception to that is shooters. It's a rare shooter that actually feels good at 30, whether I'm using a keyboard and mouse or controller. Far Cry 5 is no exception. At 30 FPS, the game feels slow and the controls have noticeable lag to them, so while it'll require some visual sacrifices, let's see how the Masher does at greater than 30 FPS. At 1080p in low settings, with 70% resolution scaling, the Masher can't quite lock at a perfect 60 FPS in every scenario. It's at 60 a good bit of the time, but it also frequently drops into the low to mid 50s. Pleasantly, frame pacing stays pretty consistent, so it's not annoying to play at a variable frame rate. Some games do have issues with that, and I'd only want to play them at a locked frame rates on a non-variable refresh rate monitor. The difference in control latency is incredibly obvious, with everything feeling about twice as snappy and responsive. I'm using a keyboard and mouse for this section, so it'll look a bit twitchier, but in a good way. You can see that at this resolution the game is soft and it doesn't look much better than an early generation Xbox One shooter. So there are definite trade-offs and I wouldn't automatically choose this combination of settings, but a higher frame rate experience is possible and depending on your preferences, it may be worth it. At 1440p in low settings, at 80% resolution scaling, the Masher can lock at a consistent 30 FPS. Viewers who can do the quick math might wonder how much higher resolution this looks than 1080p, and the answer is not really any different. It looks worse than my 1080p settings because I've knocked things down to low, so I wouldn't do this unless you really wanted the UI to be native 1440p on your 1440p monitor, but it's an option. Also, the Masher can run the game at 4K in very high settings at, let's call it a variable frame rate. Can the PS4 do that? I didn't think so. So which platform wins really is determined by what your preferences are. At 1080p and trying to match the PS4's experience, the Masher doesn't quite look as good. But if you're like me and you can't stand playing a shooter at 30 FPS, then you'd probably prefer the Masher, soft resolution and all. The Masher loses in a direct comparison but offers more flexibility that might make it a better choice for some of you. Like I said in my Kingdom Come video, the thing that stands out the most is how quickly the PS4 and Masher are getting left behind the newer current gen platforms, the PS4 Pro, the Xbox One X, and the Potato Masher Pro. I'd expect that gap to only grow if this gen has another year or two left before new hardware releases. A big thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon. Check out the Potato Masher Pro and the Xbox One X playing Far Cry 5 if you haven't yet, consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video, and let's continue the conversation down in the comments. Have a great day.